everyone. Welcome to the, I'm sorry, excuse me. My name is Chris Goff. I'm the technical producer for Colorado Humanities. We're here for the romance and historical fiction finalist readings. Everything we do at Colorado Humanities is a team effort, and I would particularly like to thank Josephine Jones, Director of Programs for Colorado Humanities and Center for the Book. It is through her vision and dedication that Colorado Humanities is able to bring such top quality programming to the citizens of Colorado. Thanks to Abigail Chibitnoy-Kerstetter for taking the lead on Colorado Book Awards in these challenging times, as well as our board of directors and the army of volunteers who selected the finalist books. Although we are online this year instead of snug in the Book Bar, we can still purchase books through the Book Bar's website. Book Bar is our co-host for the readings and will gladly mail them to you. Our sponsors also continue their support. Denver-based Outskirts Press, a longtime sponsor of the Colorado Center for the Books, stands ready to help authors develop, publish, and market their books. Colorado Sun is also providing funding and is featuring weekly Sunlit excerpts and interviews from many of our Colorado authors' books. We want to thank them, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and all of you for being here. Let's all use #CelebrateStory, #Colorado Book Awards as we post about our experiences with the finalists and their work. We are delighted to welcome Abigail Chibitnoy-Kerstetter as our MC. Her book, How to Dress a Fish, won the 2020 Colorado Book Award winner for poetry and was shortlisted in the international category of the 2020 Griffin Prize for Poetry. Her poems have appeared in a myriad of publications. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Colorado State University and is a mentor of the Institute of American Indian Arts MFA program in creative writing. Please welcome Abigail Chibitnoy-Kerstetter.
Good evening, welcome. We're so excited to be hosting this program again this year. As always, we're excited to celebrate our Colorado authors, and we've got some really wonderful and engaging stories to hear from this evening with our historical fiction and romance categories. We will have a Q&A with the authors from each category after the category has read. And if you have questions, please type them into the comment section. We'll also bring all of our authors back up at the end of the program for any additional questions that might arise or to have a little bit of back and forth discussion with all of our finalists. But we'll begin first with historical fiction. Our first finalist is Linda Lafferty, who will read from her novel, Fierce Dreamer. Linda is the author of The Bloodletter's Daughter, House of Bathory, Light in the Shadows, The Girl Who Fought Napoleon, and the Colorado Book Award winners, The Drowning Guard and The Shepherdess of Siena. Her books have been translated into 11 languages. She holds a doctorate in bilingual special education and taught in Spain for 3 years. Welcome, Linda.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. So my book is Fierce Dreamer. Oh, look it's right there, Fierce Dreamer. And it's a story of Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an incredible artist during the 17th century. And she overcame so many obstacles. I don't want to give too much away, but despite these obstacles, she in Rome, which is a dangerous place for women, she really came through and she produced some wonderful art. And the Getty just bought Lucrezia, and they're showcasing that. I think it was this last week. The National Gallery in London did a wonderful exhibition in October through January. She's really incredible. If you don't read my book, read about her because she is something special. I'm going to read a little bit from my book, and it takes place in Rome. This is the Campo dei Fiori, and Artemisia is with her kind of her guardian or the caretaker doing the marketing. At that time, women could not go unescorted, and she has her little brothers around to protect her. So here we go. Campo de Fiori. The Roman marketplace was a palette of color, a festival of aromas. The bright vegetables and fruits, verdant lettuces and artichokes, scarlet peppers and tomatoes, orange pumpkins and Sicilian oranges. A brace of teal-toned pheasants hung in the butcher's tent alongside an open-mouthed hogshead, brown prosciutto, red fat beaded salamis. The olive vendor dipped a wooden ladle deep into barrels of brine, drawing out his shining jewels and shades of bright greens and glossy ebony. The intoxicating aromas of cheeses, roasting meats, and fresh-baked bread called from every direction. Stray cats yowled for trimmings and tidbits, weaving between the vendor's legs. Ah, and the flowers. Lavenders, tender violets, yellow-eyed daisies, and lacy wild carrot blooms were stacked in tarred buckets filled with cool water. Bouquets of purple lilacs attracted bees from every corner of the city, the market alive with buzzing. And then Artemisia goes and she goes to a mushroom vendor. The boys hurried off to buy themselves cones of honeyed almonds and roasted chestnuts. Maddalena and Artemisia inspected mushrooms from the forager's stand. The proprietor was in the mountains gathering and had left his elderly mother, Chiara, in charge. She was a one-eyed woman, her good eye startlingly blue like a chip of the sky. Artemisia poured over wood-colored porcini, separating the young, tender buttons from the more showy umbrella-shaped adults. Her hands flashed out of their own accord, arranging them in what seemed a haphazard pile, gracefully spilling like a cornucopia of bounty. She stepped back, letting the morning light bathe her composition. She felt the blue eye studying her. "You are an artist," Chiara said, pointing to the stack of mushrooms. It wasn't a question, but Artemisia answered anyway. "Si, I study under my father, Signor Orazio Gentileschi. I've heard tell of you. Your father's talented, but they say you may be more so. I see that gift in you." Artemisia blushed. "They? Who are they?" The woman waved her hand, swooping the air. "La gente, I Romani, the people, the Romans. I hear things. People think because I'm afflicted with blindness in one eye, I must not have good ears either." "But you must be careful, Signorina," Chiara whispered, moving close to her ear. "There are bad people in the world, very bad." And Artemisia moves on. Artemisia wandered away from Maddalena to inspect buffalo mozzarella in the dairy woman's vat. The vendor drew out 2 pieces Artemisia indicated and laid them on a linen cloth, creamy balls beaded with moisture. "2 good ones," said a guttural voice next to her, round and firm. Artemisia snapped her head around to find Signor Cosimo Quarli leering at her. She smelled his rancid breath, a front tooth black with rot. "Every time I see you, Artemisia, you are more beautiful." She backed away. The dairy woman saw her customer was threatened, or at very least she feared she was going to lose a purchase. "See here, signore," she said, "leave the girl in peace." She said it loud enough that the melon vendor adjacent lifted his head. He whispered something to his son, who took off running. Signor Quarli turned his back on the woman, moving closer to Artemisia. "Providence must provide these fortunate encounters," he said, rolling his eyes up to the blue heavens. His lower lids were flaccid and rimmed in red like bloody meat. Here I am to see the tooth puller, and you appear. Your beauty takes away the pain. Artemisia felt a flood of bright rage flowing in her veins. Why should I have my little brothers defend me or a man rush to my side? She loved the Campo di Fiori and would stand her ground. Her shoulders and back straightened as her anger blossomed. Signor Corley, she said with disdain, I am charged with marketing for the week. Forgive me if I don't have time to speak to you. She turned back to the dairy woman. Yes, I will take those two. And one more, even bigger than the pair together. The dairy woman laughed, covering her broken teeth with her hand. Her laugh and Artemisia's dismissive tone enraged Signor Corley. How dare you talk to me in that way, signorina, he said. What are you, all of 12? A girl, no less. She ignored him, saying nothing, as the woman wrapped up the mozzarella in damp cloth. She gave coins to the vendor, then faced Corley, her chin held high. Didn't you say I had grown, she said, looking at him straight in the eye. Well, I've grown enough not to be afraid of you, Signor Corley. She glowered, he glowered, rage seizing him. Artemisia, look at my face, he hissed, pointing to himself. Don't you see a resemblance? A resemblance? As she looked at him in shock, a hand pulled hard at her elbow. Maddalena pushed her charge behind her, defending the girl like a lioness. The melon boy stood panting beside her. Signor Corley, said Maddalena, you know better than to talk to this girl unescorted. Signor Corley snorted. Bah! She's the daughter of my friends. Why shouldn't I? A growl began, low and mean in Maddalena's throat. Tend to your own business, signore. You are never to approach her. Ha capito? Do you understand? Corley's face hardened, the leer long gone, but a dangerous expression taking its place. His narrow nose pulled up in haughtiness, his eyes narrowed into slits. You forget your place, woman, he said. How dare you address me in that tone? You are a servant. I am a servant to Signor Orazio Gentileschi, she said, and the Signora. I know for a fact that I represent her wishes. Good day. Ta-da!
Thank you, Linda. That was beautiful. I, for one, cannot wait to read more of that novel. Our next finalist, Aimie K. Runyan, will read from her book, Across the Winding River. Aimie has had to brave, in typical Colorado fashion, a bit of snow and late seasonal spring weather to join us this evening, but we're so glad she could. Aimie writes to celebrate history's unsung heroines. She has been honored as a Historical Novel Society Editor's Choice Selection, as a two-time finalist for the Colorado Book Awards, and as a nominee for the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer of the Year. Welcome, Aimie. Oh, Aimie, you're muted.
There. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the honor of being nominated. So I'm going to read from Across the Winding River. It was interesting to choose a passage for this because I do have three main characters that are really dominant. And because I do write female-centric historical fiction, I'm actually kind of taking an uncharacteristic choice tonight and reading from my male protagonist. It's the first time I've written from a male point of view, but Max is kind of the genesis character of this book, and I love him. So I'm going to read a bit of Max's story, and I hope you enjoy it. I wasn't greeted by the usual sense of baking bread or simmering lamb stew, but by the soft sounds of my mother weeping. Dad sat next to her on the sofa, his arm wrapped around her. He was home from his shop hours early, which never happened in my memory. He closed it once for a week when he fell dangerously ill with the flu, then another week when I was born, but not since then. He prided himself on keeping the shop open from 8 to 5 Sunday through Friday without fail. He did close an hour early on Fridays in winter when the sunset fell before 5 o'clock, so he wouldn't miss the Sabbath, but only during the 4 or 5 weeks it was truly necessary. The only other exceptions were for high holidays. More often than not, he opened early and stayed late to help busy clients who couldn't schedule a fitting during his shop hours. "What's wrong? Is Ma sick?" I asked Dad, not bothering with a greeting. I thought better of the question, knowing she wouldn't spend tears on her own account. "Are you sick?" "Have a seat, Bubba," Dad said, calling me the endearment from my youth. No one had used since I was in grade school. "We have some bad news." I sat in the armchair Dad usually lorded over, and Ma passed me a wrinkled letter with shaking hands. The first sheet was reasonably crisp and written in English by a woman's hand. The second was written in Yiddish by a man and looked like it had been run over by German panzers a few times before making its way to us. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Blumenthal, I had the pleasure of meeting your cousin Hillel Blumenthal when I was serving as a nurse for the Red Cross in Riga. The extent of the atrocities committed against the Jewish people in Latvia cannot be described in words. I saw him 6 months ago in the Riga ghetto, and while he was dangerously underfed, he was as well as can be expected. He begged me to send this letter to you, and I did not dare try until I returned home to Sweden. I am sorry to send you such grim news, but I hope knowing the truth can somehow give you some solace. I keep Hillel in my prayers each night, and your family as well. Yours faithfully, Freya Larson." I turned to the second sheet, and while I was reasonably conversant in Yiddish, I did little practice in reading it. My father saw how I struggled with the language and a harried penmanship, and paraphrased the letter himself. "Hillel says there was a mass execution of Jews when the Germans invaded last year. Your grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins were all rounded up. Hillel was spared because of his schooling in Moscow, he thinks. He had been relocated to a ghetto in Riga and thinks it's just a matter of time before the Germans decide they can do without him, too. The German army kicked out the Red Cross, so they have no plans to make peace." I passed the letter back to Ma, whose sobs had grown louder as she heard the news spoken from my father's lips. She had been worried about the absence of letters in the past couple of years, but the mail had never been reliable, even before the Soviets invaded in 1939. We'd heard the Germans had invaded last year, but I got the feeling my parents thought they couldn't be any worse than the Russians. Worry was worry, and it didn't matter which army held the bayonets. I'd never met my family in Latvia, but my parents spoke of them so often they didn't feel like strangers. I hadn't told my parents, but I'd planned on taking them on a trip back to the old country once my practice was established, so they could introduce me to my extended family. They'd sacrificed those relationships for my sake before I was even conceived, and it seemed only one small way to thank them for the opportunities they'd given me. But now there was nothing to go back to. I placed the letter on the table Dad used for his evening drink when we sat together listening to the news or radio shows. I crossed the room, knelt before my parents, and took them in my arms. For the first time in my life, I saw my father dissolve into tears. I couldn't restrain my own. "I wish I could make this better for you," I said. "Roosevelt will make the bastard Hitler pay for all of this." I wish my mother could have met you," Dad said. "You look so much like your grandfather, may he rest in peace, that she thinks she was looking back in time. I wish you know what it was like to have a big family dinner for Sabbath, to have a house full of cousins for Passover." And so I did. The Casses, the Greens, the Herschels. They may not have been blood relatives, but it's family all the same. You've given me an amazing life. "And you still want to fight, don't you, Bubba?" my mother finally managed to ask, mastering her voice for a few moments. "I do," I admitted, "now more than ever." "Then go," Ma said, cupping my face in her hands. "Go over and make those Manzurim pay for what they've done." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aimie. What a powerful and amazing reading. Again, I'm so excited to add all of these books to my ever-growing shelf to read. Thank you. That was great. Our last finalist in the historical fiction category is Molly Tanzer, who will read from her novel, Creatures of Charm and Hunger. Molly is the British Fantasy and Locus Award-nominated author of the Diabolists Library series and the Weird Western Vermilion, as well as many critically acclaimed short stories. She lives in Boulder. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to be here tonight, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to read to you tonight from Creatures of Charm and Hunger. The passage is in the middle of the book, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a context, and a context for the series too, which is that these books are historical fiction, but they're historical fantasy, and each is set in a different time period. This one takes place at the end of World War II. It has two main characters, but tonight we're just going to deal with one. Her name is Miriam. She's a young Jewish girl who is living in hiding in the remote north of England in the village of Hawkshead, which is actually where Beatrix Potter grew up. And it's known for like a few other things too. And it's hard to get to even today. So it is very, very remote. She's living with a family friend and that friend's daughter, who's about the same age as she is. And Miriam is special in a few ways, but one of those ways is that she can do magic. And the magic of these books is very based in the Renaissance tradition of like John Dee, where you would sort of traffic with beings and elementals who would be willing to do you services for a cost, right? And so they come to be known colloquially in this series as demons, but they're not sort of Judeo-Christian demons in that sense. So she can do this. Everyone she knows does this. Her parents can do it. And they're part of an organization that does a lot of things, including fighting the Nazis here at the tail end of World War II. At the start of this book, Miriam has found out that her parents are suspected of going over to the enemy, that they have betrayed the cause, and that they are going to, and that they've gone missing. We know they've gone missing. It's suspected they've betrayed the organization. And so Miriam is like, no way, that can't be. And she decides to investigate this mystery by doing something that's a combination of astral projection and spirit possession. And so that's where we're going to pick up tonight. Miriam locked herself into her room that night, which was not her custom. She also set up diabolic wards similar to those that protected the farmhouse, some to alert her if she were to be observed, and others that would hopefully prevent any observations to begin with. She was ready. She had the mirror frame Sam had made waiting for her on her desk, and she'd gotten good at not just inhabiting, but controlling the ducks and geese of Nancy's flock. Though she knew success might mean getting bad news as easily as good, she was excited to finally learn something of what had happened to her parents. Modern mirror methods had been an invaluable find. The author's method of creating a scrying glass had been easily done, save for requiring a bit of something belonging to the person that one wished to scry. Her only real option had been her father's devil trap. The book promised that the item would be returned unharmed, which begged the question of why it needed to be returned to begin with, but that was just the way of diablerie. Miriam squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and popped a tablet into her mouth. Then she poured the potion she'd prepared into the mirror well. It fizzed as it struck the metal, only to become smooth and flowing, and almost mercury-like. Quickly but carefully, Miriam set aside the vial and picked up her father's devil trap. The clay bowl set momentarily atop the glassy surface of the potion, reflected in it before sinking in. Another sizzle and it was gone. Miriam hoped it really would be returned unharmed. She picked up the mirror. If she'd done it right, the liquid would hold its shape. It undulated slightly, but did not spill no matter which way she turned it. She played with it for a moment or two before admonishing herself for acting like a child. This wasn't a toy. "Show me my father," said Miriam, adding, "Aegon Cantor." By that time, she was starting to feel the sensation of double presence, something that was beginning to resolve, and something was beginning to resolve in the rippling surface of the mirror. At first, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. The description of the process in modern mirror methods had said she would see the person, but all Miriam saw was a quiet forest floor. The year's fragile grass and last year's leaves were silvered by what moonlight spilled through the pine boughs. It was night, or maybe very early morning. And it was a clear night, though very cold, given the frost on the ground. This was wrong. It was supposed to show Miriam her father, not whatever this was. Was this bit of grass, windswept and lonely, where her poor father had been laid to rest? Did that mean whatever had happened so long ago that the earth no longer looked as though it had ever been disturbed? She noticed a shape in the grass, white as the moon above and similarly curved. She couldn't make sense of it. The tablet was really hitting her now. Her soul had peeled away from her body like a scab. While her body's hand held the mirror, her spirit's hand grabbed her veil knife. A strip of spirit flesh and spirit skin came away when she used it on her arm. more than she had yet taken, but now was the time. Miriam watched as her flesh turned into vapor. She emptied her lungs and inhaled it all. A passing night-flying insect winged into her line of sight through the mirror, and quick as the blink of an eye, she was inside of it. It worked. Miriam had to keep her elation in check as she felt the horror of her wings and the night air sliding along her carapace, saw through eyes that were distinct from her own, compound both more and less accurate to a purpose. She'd done it. She was inside another living creature somewhere, she assumed within Germany. Now to find her father. Miriam's wings moved impossibly fast as she asserted her will, forcing the insect to spiral down to where the mysterious pale object waited to be identified. She glided along the length of the white crescent, still wondering what on earth it might be and why the mirror had shown her this. Then she swerved out of the way to avoid a protuberance and realized what it was. It was a tooth. It was a jawbone. Her father's jawbone. Miriam was back in her room, but not her body. She screamed with lungs that had no air, through a throat that could issue forth no sound. She had thought herself prepared. She hadn't been. Her father was dead in a forest. Miriam reeled, but she was isolated from the physical sensations of shock. Her spirit's palms did not sweat, could not sweat. Her spirit's heart could not pound. She could not cry. There was only the terrible knowledge that she would never hear her father's voice again. She would never see his slow, uncertain smile, nor smell his shaving soap. How had Egon Cantor gone from a living man reading in his shabby wingback chair in their house in Weimar to a corpse lying silent upon the loam of this frost-rimed forest? And where was that forest? And who had left him there? She'd lost her instinct, she'd lost her host, but not her need for answers. Thank you. That's all I'm going to read tonight.
These short readings are such teases. Okay, now we have some time for a bit of a Q&A with our historical fiction authors before we move on to our romance finalists. And I think we're going to have them all come back on screen, and Amy's still able to join us, which is fantastic. I know you're dealing with some elements and tech. And I believe we already have had one question come through our chat. So this question comes from Patricia Stolte, and her question is for all the historical fiction authors. Do you do all your research in advance, or do you look things up as you write? And we will just go in whatever order you would like.
Okay, I'll start. I do tremendous research. I love research, so I will be looking into things. I will be reading documents. I go to the sites, the places where the history happened. I go into archives. But I never stop researching. In fact, even when I'm in proofreading, I will find something and go, I've got to change that because it didn't happen that way. I love research. And so to answer that question, I never stop researching.
For me, I generally find that I do a lot of research before I start writing the draft. And so that I feel like I've got a good basis to be able to start writing the story. Of course, at that point, it is always so tempting to just barrel in and start writing. But, I feel like it's important to take a good amount of time to get some basis reading done. But then once I start barreling through a draft, I try to keep momentum going. As a busy working mother, momentum is my friend. Momentum is absolutely my friend. So I don't really stop to research every single detail as I write. I will leave notes to myself in the draft saying, research X, Y, and Z fact. The only exception to that might be if I feel like if I leave something out and I make a big mistake that it will cause me to have to do a lot of rewriting later, I might stop and do that. Sometimes I'll do it if I'm, stuck with, writer's block or whatever. But then usually after I finished a draft, I will go through and do a research draft and fill in all the holes. And of course, even like, like Linda said, even as far in as proofreading, if I question something, I will go back and double check and say, even minute details, because I feel like you really can't be too scrupulous. But yeah, that's my process. Generally, one big bout of research in the beginning and one toward the end of the process.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I tend to treat research as an ongoing thing, but I do often the reason I'm when I'm writing something historical, I'll often do a very extensive outline, so I kind of know what I need to research along the way as well. So I'm not caught in that trap of like, oh, well, they couldn't have been there at that place at that time because it didn't exist, or like, those kinds of things where you can really get yourself. But I do find that ongoing research is crucial to the development of a project, because often for me, I don't know about what I'm writing until I'm several drafts in, and I keep revising, right? And so like at that point, if my understanding of my own work has changed, then my research has to change as well. And so I've definitely had the experience of feeling like I was on top of something, and then realizing that actually like it's going in a completely different direction. And so I need to take a little time and like read and maybe experience some of the things that I like to do a lot of cultural history. So read a novel that's set at this time period, or like read this writer that has come up that I've read about, or get into this artist that I've discovered, or things like that. So it can be one of the most exciting and rewarding parts of the writing process for me.
Wonderful. And I'd actually like to just follow that up a little bit with how you approach, the research is so integral to before you even get that draft done. And in historical fiction, is it really stemming from just a love of history and just reading widely across history, and an idea grabs you that you want to research more? Or do you start with a character and a situation and then sort of flesh out where in terms of history you'd like to start your research? Or do you just always have a topic in your back burner that you're like, I just got to finish this so I can start researching that, so that'll lead to the next story?
Oh, for me, I always start with a historical situation. That's almost always where I start. Like, I'm going to write about the Russian female fighter pilots from World War II, or I'm going to write about the women who were telephone operators in World War I. And then a character follows up shortly after that, because it personalizes the historical topic of interest. But historical fiction is always what I gravitated to as a reader. And so it was very natural for me to progress here as a writer. And it was kind of always, even when I look back at my childhood scribblings, it was often, historical based things. I'm fickle. There are a lot of historical fiction writers who stick with one period of history that will spend their entire career writing, like Pem Janoff. She writes what she calls to be love songs to Jewish Europe, and she will write for the bulk of her career Jewish-centric World War II fiction, and that's what she does. I plan on, I started in 16th or 17th century French Canada, and am now, and I've spanned, a lot of different times and places since then. And, so it's, I kind of, I'm a little bit less focused in one area than some authors, because they like to keep their research in one area. But so I'm kind of all over the place, because I've always been, a lover of history. So it's always a great excuse to learn more about it.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it's always character. I go, I love the history, of course, in the research, but I'm always drawn to a character. And then I will look at the different layers of history around that time, the setting, and what's going on, the conflict. What I really focus on the character.
I like to think about it as a somewhere in between the two of you. I think about things as problems. Like, what problem am I trying to solve? Mm-hmm. What's inside of me right now that I'm thinking about that I need to get out? And, I definitely am all over the place as well. I'm a bit of a history magpie. One of the reasons that I did not complete my PhD was I was like, I know I will never be able to concentrate on the same thing for like 5 years writing it. Like, there's no way. And even when I did this series, I wrote the first book, which is sort of a feminist retelling of Picture of Dorian Gray. I pitched it as a standalone, and my publisher was like, we'd love to do a series. And I was like, if it's going to be a series, it's going to be different characters in different time periods, because there's no way I have the attention span for 3 books in a row. And they were like, oh, interesting. So that's how that came about. You know, I really wanted to get in there. I like to find something and then I latch onto it and I get obsessed with it for as long as I'm writing about it. And then like, it's rare that I end up going back to it a second time. The one thing that would not be true of is the British 18th century. I love the 18th century, and that was what my MA was in. And I love the novels of it and the setting and the costumes and all that. And I often find myself drawn to it aesthetically. And so I've visited there a few times, but most of the time I'm all over the place.
Wonderful. And I actually have a follow-up for you, Molly, from one of our audience members upon registration. Lindsay Mason says, I enjoyed the entire Diabolists Library trilogy immensely, as well as your other novels. If you were going to host a demonic presence to enhance your own senses or connectivity, which subject's demon would you invite? And please don't say writing, because you already have that gift naturally.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That was like the greatest question. Thank you so much. That's really fun. You know, honestly, the demon from the first book is really like my favorite. I mean, that it's weird because I don't mean to bring down the tone, but that book was a lot about sort of my own struggles with substance abuse in my past, and like a couple of other things that were like a part of me, and that sort of conflict of like, here is this thing and you can become a part of it, and it maybe does terrible things to you, but like what's your life like? Because I don't know, it's there's a lot going on with it, right? And so but that demon in particular, I would say, is particularly the one that's closest to my heart, and the one that's probably the closest that's probably the one that I would choose, given that it's like, here, eat something delicious and then let's go look at art and feel really weird for several hours. And that just sounds like a good Tuesday afternoon to me still to this day. So I don't know.
That sounds like a great Tuesday afternoon. Okay, we will have to move on at this point to our romance writers, but do stay tuned for the end, where we'll have a chance to ask some additional questions of these wonderful historical fiction writers as well. Bronwyn Long Borne is a nurse by day and a writer by night. She is the author of the Shalimar trilogy, written under the pen name Rorit Buchner. Bronwyn will read from her novel, Custodian of the Spirits. Welcome, Bronwyn.
Good. Thank you so much, Abby. So here's Custodian of the Spirits, and I'm going to read a section. Custodian of the Spirits is a story about a single mother traveling west with her 2 young children in 1857. And of course, she meets the wagon master, and romance ensues. And there are a lot of adventures and a lot of characters along the way. But this scene takes place after he has taken her to a Sioux camp. And she's not really happy with the way things turned out. So she's angry, and there's a conflict that is boiling. He strode through the tall grasses, penetrating the night, as driven as the hard rain that had begun to fall. She had skirted his protection by wandering beyond his established boundaries. Claire had told him she was bathing. Rain pelted them, the seeker and the sought, a torrent that would have driven lesser mortals to shelter. Fiona arched back and lifted her arms across toward the sky, welcoming the rush, letting it wash over her face and body. Keir fingered the brim of his hat and kept walking undeterred. Lightning turned the sky blue-white. Fiona stepped into the tall grasses, dressed, and set out for her wagon, cleansed of all but her thoughts of Keir. Introspection turned to frustration at her inability to free herself from him. He had put her and her son in danger. He had teased her with his affections. Her pride was bruised by the emotional extremes, the way he lured her with his smiles and stares, but never delivered on what his empty flirtations had seemed to promise. With her every step, her anger grew. With his every step, his desire to ensure her well-being increased. It was at that moment they met, a collision of tension and relief, illuminated by the storm that raged overhead.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn. That was beautiful. I'm, again, looking forward to reading all of these. So glad you could join us. We'll be having a Q&A again with our romance readers after they have all read. Our next finalist in the romance category is Jennie Marts. Jennie is the USA Today best-selling author of award-winning books filled with love, laughter, and always a happily ever after. She will be reading from A Cowboy State of Mind from her Credence Horse Rescue series.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so excited and thrilled to be a finalist. And I'm so excited about this book. Get it on the right side. This is the first book in a brand new series of small town cowboy romance featuring a horse rescue ranch in the mountains of Colorado. And side note, the next book in the series, When a Cowboy Loves a Woman, just came out a couple weeks ago. So just had to throw that in there. A Cowboy State of Mind is like, I got to put it on the right side, is like the Horse Whisperer meets Hope Floats. And when bubbly Bryn Callahan and broody Zane Taylor protect an unwanted horse and end up with an animal rescue operation that they can only handle when they rely on each other. In this story, Zane Taylor, who looks like really happy on this cover, but actually he's a scarred and battered loner who has like the scar running all the way down the side of his face that he got from his abusive father. He has this gift with animals, horses in particular, but he's at a loss when it comes to women and how to handle them. And even though he's sworn off love, he can't seem to stay away from Bryn Callahan. And he's known for being a horse whisperer, but he can't seem to find his voice where Bryn is concerned. And Bryn Callahan, she has a heart for strays, but she's through trying to save damaged men. She vows to only date nice guys, and which is a category that definitely does not contain our Zane here. Too bad he's the only one who sets her pulse racing every time she's around him. Starting a horse rescue ranch was not in Bryn's plans, but try telling that to the assembly of abandoned animals that have found their way to her doorstep. When a chance encounter with a horse headed for slaughter brings Zane and Bryn together, they find themselves given this chance to save not just the horse, but maybe each other. I love that this book goes from heartbreaking with the parallels between the abandoned animals and this abused and scarred hero to heartwarming and funny with the antics of the animals, including an ornery goat named Otis and a fashion-conscious hog named Tiny and a mischievous mini horse named Seamus who loves macaroni and cheese and jelly beans. And the scene that I am reading for you all tonight, it takes place right after Bryn rescues her first horse. It's towards the beginning of the book, and she and Zane see it tied up in this dirty horse trailer outside of the diner on her way into work. And she finds out that the horse is headed for slaughter, and these two guys tell her that she can have the horse for, the cost of their breakfast and $100. And Zane knows that she's dead broke and only has $6 in her checking account. But after overhearing the exchange between the two men, he ends up leaving her a $100 tip for his breakfast. And it's a bit of a trial, getting the horse out of the trailer, and the horse is quite distressed. And this scene is what happens after Bryn gives the guys their money and they drive off, leaving Bryn and Zane alone with the horse. So here we go. A Cowboy State of Mind. Zane's lips formed the slightest smile, and her stomach dipped and swayed, producing the same wild panic that had been in the horse's eyes. She'd forgotten how intense he was, How exhilarating it was to be in his presence, to have him extend a rare smile, to be the one who evoked that emotion from him. It was addictive and dangerous, and far from the nice, safe guy she knew she should be looking for. Focus on the horse. She approached cautiously, speaking softly and holding her hand out as she'd seen Zane do. Hey there, sweet girl. You're safe now. She stroked the side of the horse's head as she continued to offer gentle assurance. The horse's tail swished a few times, but she held still, letting Bryn tenderly stroke her neck. You're doing great, Zane said, resting his hand on her shoulder. She likes you already. Horses are good judges of character, and she recognizes you've got a good heart. Bryn flushed at the praise, and at the sudden rush of heat that swept along her back from the spot Zane's hand was touching. Her mouth went dry, but she kept her gaze trained on the horse and prayed Zane couldn't feel her tremble. She did believe animals had an innate sense about people, had seen it many times with their dogs as they shied away from some while openly licking the faces of others. She only hoped she could earn the trust of this horse, who had obviously seen enough of the bad in people to be wary. So what do we do now? She asked. Should we call Logan, ask him to bring over a trailer so we can get her back to my farm? Zane shook his head and moved his hand to gently rest it on the horse's neck. No way. She's been through enough today. I'm not putting her through the distress of getting back in a trailer. Then how are we going to get her home? He tilted his head, eyeing the cloudless blue sky. Seems to me like a good day for a walk. A walk? You know my farm is over 2 miles outside of town. Not that she hadn't ever walked home from town before, but she'd never done it with a 3-legged dog, a traumatized horse, or a devilishly handsome cowboy in tow. And certainly never with all 3 at the same time. Zane shrugged. It's not that far. Probably won't take more than an hour. But you could call Logan to pick you up and I'll meet you out there. She cocked an eyebrow. Not a chance. If you're walking, I'm walking. Don't you need to finish your shift? She shook her head. Nah, we're dead today, and I already told Gil I was taking the rest of the day off to deal with the horse. The corners of his lips tugged up. Then I guess we're taking a morning stroll. 10 minutes later, Bryn emerged from the diner. The 2 dogs pranced at her heels as she practically skipped toward Zane, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Her eyes were bright, and a huge smile broke across her face. He chuckled softly. What's with you? You look like you're walking across a trampoline. I feel like I'm on a trampoline, like I'm going to bounce into the air with excitement. She threw her arms around his neck. I need something to hold on to so I don't float away. He could feel her shoulders trembling as he pulled her against him. You're shaking. I know, and I can't tell if it's because I'm so happy and excited because I just bought a horse, or if I'm terrified and panic-stricken because I just bought a horse. She pressed her cheek into his chest. Can you just hang on to me for a second, just until I feel steadier? He swallowed, wanting to say something witty or cute, but unable to think of a thing, his brain too undone by the warmth of her body flush against his. She tilted her head and let out a shuddering exhale. He could feel the warmth of it on his neck. I can't seem to catch my breath. She looked up at him from under dark eyelashes, her eyes wide and frightened. I think I might hyperventilate. I need something to ground me. Quick, do something to shock my brain out of this panic mode. He didn't think, didn't analyze. He just did the first thing that came to mind. He leaned down and kissed her. It was a quick kiss, a hard press of his lips against hers. But as he drew back, he couldn't help but steal another soft taste of her mouth. One more tender graze, but enough to leave him breathless for more. She pulled away, her eyes round, her lips parted in a surprised, oh. Was she mad? Had he overstepped? She'd said earlier she wanted to be friends. Did friends entail a shock-reducing lip lock? Although it had been panic-inducing for him, his heart was pounding like a scared rabbit facing a wolf. He watched her face, waiting for a reaction. She just stared at him, wide-eyed, like maybe she was the scared rabbit. That seemed the more likely scenario, that he was the wolf. Sweat broke out on his back. and he raised one shoulder, trying for an offhand shrug. You said to do something to shock you. Her lips finally moved as the corners tugged up in the slightest grin. I think I'm still in shock. You might have to do it again. There you go.
Thank you, Jenny. That was terrific. Our last reader for the evening is Shelley Shepard Gray. As a reminder, we'll have a Q&A after Shelley. But Shelley is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of numerous mystery novels and romantic fiction series, including the seasons of Sugar Creek, Sisters of the Heart, and Families of Honor. She is a recipient of an RT Book Reviews Reviewer's Choice Award, and Shelley will be reading from her novel, Shall We Dance?
Thanks so much, Abby. Just like everyone else, I'm just thrilled to be here with everyone tonight and so excited to be part of this finalist evening. My book is, here we go, Shall We Dance? And it's the first in a Dance With Me series. And I have to tell y'all, I'm just was so happy about this series because it's about three sisters that only had just met each other through a DNA test. And they agree to spend one full year together. They move all across the country. They live in a loft right above a dance studio. And my heroine of Shall We Dance is Shannon, and who just happens to have just started this dance studio. And what happens is the sisters are just trying their best to get along. Now, as far as the romance goes, Shannon is a ballet teacher by day, and she starts teaching ballroom dancing at night. And her very first private client, who she's so excited about, it just happens to be when he arrives and she fills out the questionnaire with him. She finds out that he's only there because he lost a football bet. So they're already off to a real bad start, and things kind of just go on from there. But what I've always liked about this book and this series is that, yes, there is a very sweet romance going on, and there's an awful lot of ballroom dancing too. But what it really is about Dylan and his sister who he's trying to protect, Shannon and her two brand new sisters who she's trying to get to know. Everyone has to go through the book and learn that they need to open up and dare to take a step forward in order to have a meaningful relationship. So that's kind of the setup for Shall We Dance? The scene that I chose to read out loud is the very second lesson when Dylan arrives at the dance studio. He sees Shannon, who's in a pretty grumpy mood. She's been dancing all day. She's not quite used to dancing all day like she used to when she was younger. She's got some blisters on her feet. He's late because he's a cop and things have been bad. She's not kind of grumpy about that too. Anyway, they finally get kind of settled and decide they better go ahead and do this dance because they both promise. So this is where we start off. After slipping on the other shoe and buckling the strap, she got to her feet, steadfastly ignoring this sting of discomfort. Dylan, I need to say this. I'm real sorry for the way I spoke to you when you came in. You don't deserve it. He looked surprised and those eyes of his lit up. I've been trying to figure out what was different about you tonight. Now I know. His lips curved into a matching smile. You got your accent on tonight. She pressed a palm over her lips. Sorry, her accent was always worse when she was emotional or tired. And on evenings like this, she practically sounded like she'd sprung from the backwoods. Why are you sorry? I like it. It's cool. I sound like a hick. Don't say that. All you sound is different, yeah? Now she felt even worse. He was being so nice, and all she'd done so far was act high and mighty, or maybe even worse than that. Clearing her throat, she said, You ready to waltz? You still up for it? Absolutely. She led the way to the classroom and turned her Ballroom Beats program onto her iPad. Skimming through the choices, she selected Moon River. The song was her favorite for beginning waltzing students thanks to the slower piece and steady beat. She enjoyed thinking about Audrey Hepburn, too. Turning to him, she smiled. Shall we dance? He nodded and placed one hand on her waist and took her right hand in his left. Let's do this, he said, looking like he was about to go into battle. Shannon bit her lip and to stop herself from grinning, but he caught it anyway. What's so funny? Did I mess up already? No, you just look so serious. Well, I've got to be. All this counting means I've got to concentrate on what I'm doing or I'm going to step on your toes. You let me worry about my toes. Well, you're already in pain. I don't want to make things worse. Glancing into his eyes, she realized that he was being completely serious. Dylan really was worried about hurting her. Oh, my toes are used to abuse. Now, stop worrying about me and just relax. Once you let your body take control, everything's easier. She started guiding him through the basic steps, counting under her breath as he followed her directions. At last. When the song ended, she stepped backward. Let me put on another song. We'll try a turn. Yeah, I'm game. Deciding he didn't need another classical arrangement, she put on Come Fly Me by Norah Jones. And as she'd hoped, Dylan looked a little taken aback, then slowly smiled. I like this better. Oh, I thought you might. When he took her in his arms again, she reminded him to lock his elbows. No noodle arms, Dylan. Yes, ma'am. She chuckled and adjusted the position of his hand on her waist. And so it continued. They waltzed. They moved. She reminded him to count, and they twirled. She changed songs. She coaxed him to stand a little closer. She tried to convince him to hear that music's beat. He hesitated, then curved his hand around her waist a little more firmly. Right away, she was aware of his height, of the way his hand warmed her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. Looking into his eyes, she smiled. You're doing great. We're dancing, Dylan. Yeah? He looked pleased. I'm still afraid of stepping on your toes. Oh, if you did, I promise it wouldn't be the first time. And look up at me. My feet are just fine. After 10 last minutes, she said, okay, gosh, I've already kept you 15 minutes late. He looked so surprised he stumbled. No way. Yeah, I'm serious now. Focus. He laughed. He spun her in a circle. Surprised, she started laughing too. Well, what was that for? I don't know. Maybe because this has been a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. I needed this tonight. I would have never guessed it. He was right. She'd been so tired and tense, but now she felt exhilarated, almost like she was used to how she was when she was a teenager. I think I was thinking the same thing. Yeah? It was a long day, but this? You ended my day on a good note. Thanks. Dylan's eyes lit up just as the front door jangled. Surprised at the late visitor, Shannon turned her head to see who it was. Then she kind of wished she hadn't, because there was her sister Tracy walking right in, her blue uniform bringing a dose of reality to the room. Shannon, what's going on? Wait, Dylan, is that you? Dylan glanced over his shoulder, blinked, and grinned. Hey, Lucky. His voice had lowered an octave. Shannon turned to face her sister, who was dressed for work. She had still had her badge chained around her neck. She also had her shoulder-length straight hair and a neat ponytail. And Tracy was staring at Dylan like he was a perpetrator. What is going on? Tracy said. We're finishing up a lesson, Shannon said. Dylan, you taking dance lessons from my sister? Looking how close they were seeing each other, Tracy's eyes narrowed. You're taking private lessons from my sister? Dylan took a step away from Shannon like she just contracted rabies. And now she was even more confused than ever before. And that's the part that I'm reading. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you again to all of our finalists this evening. Now we'll take some questions for our romance finalists before bringing back the historical fiction. A reminder, you can always enter some questions into the comments in Facebook or YouTube. I have a general question just to kind of kick us off this evening. And I am not as familiar with the romance genre from a writing standpoint or a reading. And so I'm a little curious how often you draw on past relationships for your character inspiration or the situations that they find themselves in. We can go maybe in the order that we read in. So Bronwyn, then Jennie, then Shelley.
Thank you. You know, it's a great question, but I don't have any past people. If anything, I think I named some of the characters for boys I had crushes on over the years or that kind of thing. But no, I don't. These are standalone men, I must say.
That's such a fun question. I think that we probably all use little bits of our experiences or stories of our friends or stories that we have heard somewhere in our characters. But I think that the heroes of romance novels are these fantasy men of how we want men to act and the romantic scenes that we want them to say and do. So I think that we all probably have experiences, or we hear, you know, a little bit of a story, or we talk to someone and we go, oh, I'm going to use that. Oh, can I take that? But I think a lot of that is like a fantasy of what we want the romance hero to act like. What do you think, Shelley?
Yeah, I would have to agree, Jennie. I mean, I think a lot of my books, they might start with a snippet of a conversation I might have had, or I'll overhear. A good example is this series. I always have wanted to be a good dancer. I'm really not. I convinced my husband one time to take ballroom dancing with me. We only lasted 3 times, and mainly because he went kicking and screaming, and then he ended up being really good at it. And I was really horrified that he was so good. So I think that's when, fiction and writer's prerogative gets into play, is you kind of reimagine the scene how you wish it was, where it was so romantic and you're doing all the moves that you wish you could, instead of maybe how the reality was.
Well, Jennie and Shelley, you must do a lot of eavesdropping and note-taking and character building, because you've both written several series and also across genres, I believe both of you. And so I'm curious if you could speak, what's your process like? How do you keep all those characters and backstories for the different series straight? How do you keep at it and keep inspired? Do you write in stints, or do you approach it like a 9 to 5, albeit a very creative and probably mostly enjoyable 9 to 5? What's your secret to such prolific writing?
You want to go first, Jennie?
Sure. And I probably should say, since my husband's watching, he is super romantic. So he is a super romantic guy, and we've been together many, many years. So I think I get this question a lot about how do you keep all the series straight? And I think that if you think about it, like, we all watch like 16 different shows you can watch something on Netflix and something on Hulu and something, you can have like 15 shows that you're watching and you remember all the characters, and even if you haven't seen it for a week or 6 months, or you wait for the next season, you still remember who all those characters are. And we've created these people and these stories, and so they are just as real to us. So I think, especially for me, like, I write this cozy mystery series about these women, this intergenerational book club group that like searches for clues and romance while like eating super great desserts. And every time I visit them, it's like hanging out with old friends, and it's just like being with them. And when I go back to Credence, when I spend time in Credence with all these cowboys, I'm from a small town. It's like that I'm there in that community again. Is that what the question was? And how do we stay prolific? Oh, I liked how you said how it's just such an enjoyable 9 to 5. Writing is enjoyable and we do love it, but this is also our job. And I have said that writing a novel is kind of akin to having really hard homework like every single day of your life. Because some days it is fun and easy, but other days it's hard, and we just got to keep going because we have books due and we have deadlines. So I think it's a combination of both, that we enjoy it and we have fun and it's great, but it's also really hard. What do you think, Shelley?
Yeah, I usually tell people it's writing a series is a lot like meeting new people that move next door. And at first, I know I write a lot about the Amish. I write a lot of romances, so maybe it's a new cop that moves next door. Maybe it's an Amish family. I know a little bit about them. I write notes about everybody in a notebook, like a spiral notebook. And it seems like by the time I finish a trilogy or a bigger series, I know everybody. And it's just kind of like what Jenny said, but they almost feel like family to me. Like I now have made up casts about them and their bad cousin and you name it. And I really like them. And for many of the series, I've asked my editor when it's time to start thinking about the next one. Well, maybe we could just continue the series. And they're like, no, you need to start a new one. So you almost have to make a move away and the new group come in. But I'm notorious for getting people mixed up. Not so much about, the main characters and how they feel. But I never remember what color their eyes are or what color their hair is or any of that. I have to give my books to a first reader, and she makes sure that everybody looks the same, that I describe them on page 1 is all the way through.
Wonderful. And I have one additional question for Bronwyn. Your romance, Bronwyn, also, I believe, deals with a historical time period and phenomenon and part of its plot structure as well. How much research did you do for your novel? And did you begin with an interest in the time period and the history, or did you start with your character in mind?
Great question. Thank you. I actually grew up in Laramie, Wyoming. And when you go west of Laramie, you can see the ruts from all the pioneers traveling west. And my fascination with that time period and those adventures really began when I was a child, because we'd go to the West Mountains to go hiking or picnicking or fishing. And we'd look at those ruts. And every time I passed them, I would think about the people who must have traveled that way. So since I was in the 8th grade, I had an interest in these characters actually, and in this adventure. And obviously, as I've gotten older, it's kind of evolved. But the interest in the time period is almost lifelong. And then the research, for example, to drill down into what it was like to be at the Sioux camp and what happened and the food and the interactions of men and women. That was a big set of research. Over to my left, I have a large bookcase that has a lot of the books I've used over the year. And then, of course, the internet has made research a whole lot easier. So certainly it was that. And then it was just the idea about the grit that it took the people to go cross country. The other interest I have, because this is the first book in a series, so it's interesting to hear my colleagues talk about their series called The Valley of Heart's Delight. And they're actually headed to the Valley of Heart's Delight in California, which is now Silicon Valley. So it is this valley and the evolution from the Native Americans who lived there, and then the Spanish pioneers who came there. And then the evolution as it became California and the territory and the ranchos and the cowboys and the gauchos. And so I'm knee deep in the second book and really enjoying all of the research. And I really probably put the storyline together and then do the research to round it out and back it up.
Wonderful. And that sounds like a great transitional opportunity to bring our historical fiction authors back on screen to have a couple follow-up questions for them as well. Welcome, welcome. I believe we lost Aimie from the elements? We'll have to reach out to her on her social medias and her websites to ask any additional questions from Aimie if you'd like. But having you all back in front of us, one question that we also had come up in registration for all of our authors. Natasha Christensen wants to know, how has Colorado's writing community helped you get to where you are as an author?
I can answer that one because it's so much. I live in Colorado Springs, and Pikes Peak Writers is our writing community here, and we also have a RWA community here. But Pikes Peak Writers has a huge conference every year where they bring in editors and agents, and it's one of the top 10 writing conferences in the nation that we have right here in Colorado. So any writers out there, I would definitely suggest that you go. But that is where I met my agent, my editor, actually 2 of my editors. So I actually pitched in person to Deb Worksman at Sourcebooks, and I pitched in person to Entangled. So I think Colorado and the writing organizations that we have are amazing here, and a lot of great opportunity.
Wonderful. That's so exciting to hear about. Any others?
I'll go.
Oh, Linda, I think
Front.
you needed.
And I'm pretty new at all of this, so it's enjoying to be able to use seasoned writers. But the community has been very welcoming. Colorado Authors League, and then also the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. So I have attended conferences. I've gone to the small workshops and some of the gatherings, and I've attended this event in past years when it was at the Tattered Cover and then also at Book Bar. So it's kind of exciting to be included on this side of the table this year. But I have learned so much just in the casual interactions with other writers.
And I'll say many years ago, there was the Aspen, I'm going to say Aspen Writers Conference. And Kurt Brown started it. It was just a ragtag team of people who wanted to talk about writing and try to write, and I did that, and then it has evolved into something, you know, it's very fancy now. It's an international festival, but I think that it was instrumental in that I got to hear about the process and how hard it was to write. I went 27 years without being published, and I finally settled down into the joy of writing, and I realized that's what it really was about. And I was lucky enough to get picked up and published, and I've got 7 books published, but I think it was that start really sparked something in me.
For me, this is my 3rd time in Colorado. So I was in Boulder in college and took all the writing courses there, but also for education. Then we got transferred to Arizona, then Texas, and we got transferred back to Denver. And I taught school, and that's when I started writing during my lunch breaks, romance novels. And then when we ended up moving back to Colorado this 3rd time after spending 15-20 years in Ohio, my daughter was already here. She works for a literary agency, and there were she introduced me to a lot of authors that were all part of here. So then I got to come back this time. So it's a lot what all these other authors have been saying. It's just a very fulfilling and vibrant atmosphere, no matter what stage of writing a person is on.
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Molly.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add that the the speculative fiction scene out here in Colorado is also really wonderful and inviting. And, we've got amazing authors here like Carrie Vaughn and Stephen Graham Jones and Jason Heller. And it's a really cool community of people who are writing all kinds of science fiction and fantasy and horror. And there's resources out there for writers of speculative fiction as well. And so, we've got a couple of good cons and things like that where you can make contacts as well. So Peg's Peak is great. And also there's like a couple of other organizations, but I definitely think that if you tend towards like ghosts, there's also like a lot out there, as well as like some of the more amazing, the fiction that I'm so tempted by out here that's inspired by like our amazing landscapes and stuff like that. So.
Yes, we really do have such an amazing community. I think for all genres out in Colorado, that was one of the things that drew me to the state as well, was just the depth of writers all along the Front Range and beyond. Let's see, we have this question from Veronica Maloney, and maybe also a good time to tie into what you're working on, what's next, what we can expect from you. But Veronica asks specifically, do you know when you have a winning story? Or that might also be expanded into how you might know, or to what extent you just trust and keep writing on.
Oh, I don't know. Sorry, my face is large. Should I take it first?
Yeah, go
Take
for
a
it.
stab.
Go for it.
Well, it's funny. I do think that the more you write, you learn to trust yourself. This is something that I struggle with. I mean, I've been publishing for 10 years, which to me feels like a long time, but I know people who've been publishing for 30, so it's not a long time, right? And I've learned a lot over that span of time. And I wrote before that, the shift when I started to get published and things like that. And, there have been times where I felt like I've written something that was like a slam dunk that ended up not quite being the case. And then I ended up being surprised that people really responded to something that maybe I hadn't felt like I was firing on all cylinders when I was writing. So I think I don't know. I've never had an instinct for like what I'm doing that people are going to want to respond to and things like that. But I do know that the more that I investigate my own interests and the more that I read broadly and the more that I just try and instigate that try-fail sequence in my own writing, the more that I kind of learn when I've been able to identify like what I think is good writing for me. And I'm proud when I produce that. And when I see that reflected with honors, that's great. But I also have to like hew close to my own vision in that way. So I don't know. That's not a good answer. And I apologize, but that's just like the feelings of my heart as a writer.
No, I think that's a perfectly fair answer. Anyone else want to tackle that one? And also talk about, what's next too.
I don't know that I know when it's a winner. I mean, you really don't know until it's out there and how people respond to it. What I do know is if I'm not passionate about what I'm writing, I throw it away. I've done that with several books. I've gotten to page 300 and 2 of them. And I said, I remember this one, and I don't like this heroine. I just don't like her. It's not gonna happen. And so whether people would have liked that book or not, I've got to make a decision. I got to go with my passion and my heart. And on to what I'm doing next. My agent is reading now the novel of The True Story of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, who were actually very, very good kings and a king and queen. And actually Lady Macbeth, and that wasn't her name, was Gruach, was a woman who had more right to the throne than anybody. And Shakespeare, even though it's my very favorite play, Macbeth, it's nothing like the true story of Macbeth. He was actually a good man, and she was a good woman, and they went on a pilgrimage to Rome. There are so many contradictions in the story of that Macbeth was really writing for James II, and James II claimed heritage to Banquo. And I'm starting to go on and on, so it's okay. But that's what I'm working on.
No,
So-
that's fascinating. Yeah, Jenny.
I'll tackle that. I'll try to tackle that one about do we know when we have a winner? So I think that I'm just going to speak for us all. You guys can nod or decline that this is the right answer or not. But I think when we get the idea for the book, we're like, yes, absolutely, this is a winner. And we're fired up and we start writing and we're like, oh, this book is amazing. This is going to be so great. And about halfway through, we go, oh, this is terrible. Who said I could be a writer? Why did I think I could do this?
Yeah.
And then we proofread, we go back and we finish the book and we're reading it again. And then we go, hey, this is pretty good. Wow, did I write that? Like, this is pretty good. So I think that every book that we write, we have it in our hearts and we're praying like this is the winner. That's why we're writing it, is because we want to, every book that we write, we want it to connect to somebody. We want some reader out there to be like, oh, I know exactly how that character feels. I know exactly what she's going through. That writer just reached into my heart and ripped out my exact feelings. And I think that if we do that, if we connect to a reader, if we make a reader feel like they are part of our story, then our books are a winner. How about that? And I guess I could.
Go, Jenny. Yeah.
I could share what I'm working on next too. I'd really love to share what I'm working on next. I am getting ready to turn in my the second book due to Hallmark. I'd love to put in a little plug for my newest book from Hallmark Publishing. This is Rescuing Harmony Ranch. And what's really kind of fun about this book is it's set on a living history museum. And for those of you that are in Colorado, it was inspired by Rockledge Ranch, which is a living history museum that is right down the street from my house. And so it's kind of fun that there's a blacksmith and a city girl, and like the setting was inspired by Rockledge Ranch. And so it's kind of a fun Colorado story behind that. And it's out in stores right now in Walmart and Target. And so I am working on the second Hallmark book right now. So that's where I am. And I'm also actually writing the fourth, because I'm writing two at the same time. I'm writing the fourth one in this series. So more horse rescuing to come.
Wonderful. Last round of comments. Anyone else want to share what they're working on or how and when they know they have a winner?
I'll be happy to. I should share that the next two books in this Dance With Me series are already out. This whole trilogy was published last year. So I'm very happy to share that Take the Lead and Save the Last Dance are all out there if someone's interested. And I'm working on a couple of things too. I usually write for a couple, like Jenny, a couple of books at a time, and I write full time, so I'm grateful for that. And I never know if any book's a winner. I'm pretty much always sure they're all horrible. So, I love them. I think they're fun, but I never know, oh, this one everyone's going to connect with and it's going to be a bestseller. Sometimes it's surprising to me which ones do really well, and sometimes maybe they miss the mark, or maybe they aren't bestsellers or really big sellers at the beginning, but maybe I've been writing for 20 years. So it's 8 years, 10 years later, all of a sudden that'll be the right time for the book. So I think it's a fascinating profession. It definitely is not boring, and I really am. I think I've got the best job in the world. I make stuff up all day. It's great. So.
Wonderful. It was so exciting. Do anyone else? Did we miss anyone else? Anyone else want to put a plug in for what they're working on next? Otherwise, it was a wonderful evening, a wonderful way to spend the evening with all of you, to hear bits of your work. So excited that summer's around the corner, and my own teaching slows down a bit, so I'll have time to read all of these great novels. And yeah, sounds like the lesson from those last rounds of questions is, just writing what sparks your own interest and what you feel connected to, which is really a wonderful last little tidbit to leave with our audience. So again, thank you to Outskirts Press and Colorado Sun. If you reach out to them for services or support, please do let them know you're there, because they support the Colorado Center for the book. And please support local businesses by ordering books from the Book Bar. A couple of our authors have also supplied autographed book plates. So if you do order a book from Book Bar and you would like to try to get a signed copy, just put the word book plates in the comment in your cart, and they'll be able to connect you with an autograph as well. Our next finalist reading will be the general nonfiction and history categories next Wednesday, April 21st at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And our winners will be announced at a celebration event June 26th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. Stay tuned to our website and social media, and do opt into our newsletter at the bottom of any page at coloradohumanities.org for readings and celebration updates. Stay well and have a good evening.